So today we're going to work on finding the midpoint of a graphed segment. So I have an example here of AB is a graphed segment. A is at 5, 2, and we put a point and an A at it. A lot of times I will give it listed 2U off to the side. And then B is -3, 6. Find the midpoint. So there are two ways that we're going to focus on to find the midpoint. The first way is going to be to graph it and look and see, where does it look like the middle belongs? Where does it look like the middle lands? And oftentimes what we'll do is we'll take a look and see, well, how much did the segment go up? It went from here up to here. Or if I follow it over, it went from here up to here. So it rose 4 blocks. So it only makes sense that the midpoint doesn't go up 4. It's going to go up half as much, 2 spaces. Or from B, it'll go down 2 spaces. Another thing is to think about how much it goes over. So it appears that it's going over 8 blocks or 8 squares to the right. So if it's going 8 squares to the right, then probably 4 squares is halfway. So we can kind of do this up here and over 4 squares. And it should land us right here to be the midpoint. And it looks like that coordinates of that midpoint are 1, 4. Now another way to do this is to take these numbers and use them in the midpoint formula. So the midpoint formula is basically averaging the x values and averaging the y values. So we kind of find the midpoint formula by taking the x values and adding them and dividing by 2, and the y values. Oops. That doesn't want to work. And the x values are meaning these first numbers that are located in the A and the B. So I might call this x1 and that one x2. And then I'll call this one y1 and this one y2. So then we substitute everything in and try to make it work. So the x1 would be 5 and the y1 would be -3. And y1 would be the 2, and the y2 would be the 6. And when we do this math, we should get 5 plus -3 as 2 over 2, and 2 plus 6 is 8 over 2, which we can then reduce to 1, 4. Should be the same exact answer because we're still dealing with the same exact 2 numbers. Let's try another example. So in our second example, let's investigate. We've got C, which is at -4, 1, and D at +8, -6. And let's try to do this both ways, okay? Let's think about, we've got a graph. So how much is it going from C to go to D, how much is it going downward to get from C to D? And we're counting spaces. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 spaces. So halfway would be about 3.5. So I'm assuming that we would be going up 1, 2, 3.5. And we'll be going over in that direction. So we can get halvesies on a midpoint graph. Let's see how much we're going over. And we're counting the squares. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So halfway would be about 6 squares. So if we're coming up 3.5, we would be going over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It looks to me like that would be the perfect midpoint. And I want you still to be thinking about it. You don't have to just do formulas. I want you to see what makes sense for it. Oftentimes people will give a midpoint by accident in the wrong spot and they'll say it's up here. It's like, it can't be up there. It's got to be somewhere here, probably in the middle, right? So having graph paper is definitely a plus. 2 and down maybe 2.5. And you could write it 2.5 or you could write it 2.5. Let's do our midpoint formula to figure out and make sure it all matches. So I'm going to call this one x1 and this one x2, y1 and y2. And remember that midpoint formula is basically the average. So adding x1 and x2 and dividing by 2, adding y1 and y2 and dividing by 2. So we want to plug in -4 for the x1 and 8 for the x2. It doesn't matter what we were to name it. We could have named it the other way around. It could be 8 plus -4 or -4 plus 8. We should get the same exact answer because when you add in a different order, that's the commutative property that you learned in algebra. And that's allowed. 1 and -6 plus -6. So we get -4 plus 8. Feel free to use a calculator if you need. And 1 plus -6 is -5. With our final answer being 4 divided by 2 is 2. And -5 divided by 2 is -2.5. Remember, should have the same exact answer. So honestly, you could take every problem you do for midpoint and do them 2 ways and be positive that you're getting the correct answer, graphing it and using the midpoint formula.